Hey, good evening, everyone. Okay, let's start today's session. I think a few topics were pending since we were not able to cover a few topics, which was related to database objects. I hope you guys are able to see my screen, right? So you can use question section to ask any questions or queries, or even for any chat purpose. If you want to put something, if you want to ask something, then you can use questions tab. Okay. Okay, so we are going to cover database objects today. In the last session, we had covered DDL statements and other different statements in SQL, right? So let's revise some of these concepts that we learned in the last session, in the session two. So DDL statement, right? So what do we understand by DDL statement? It's data definition language. So these statements are uh, being used to create certain kind of definition of tables or database or modify table structure. So anything related with the structure of the table, right? Structure of the database, that comes under DDL, right? Which is as the name itself indicates, it's DDL, which is data definition language. That means we are trying to modify or create a new definition, right? So in this case, all these statements will be covered or has been classified as DDL statements. So there are mainly four different DDL statements, which is create, alter, drop, and rename, that we already covered. So just we will quickly revise these concepts. How do we create tables? So we use these statements: create and then table and then table name. You first input ID, which is basically the primary key in this case, and then different attributes related to the table. In this case, we have ID, name, and price. And apart from the ID or the attributes, basically. So these are the nothing but the column names. So column names will have two things, right? One is we should always mention what's the data type, right? For every each and every relational database tables, we need to mention different data types for columns, right? So in this case, when we are creating three different attributes for product table, we need to mention data type for each and every attributes of this product table. In this case, we have mentioned as int for ID, varchar for name, and then decimal for price. And then will come we also learned about DCL statements, which is basically control language, right? So what do we control, right? If we want to control something, what we can control in database systems, we can control permissions, right? So in this case, either we can grant permission or we can deny certain permissions to some of the users or maybe all the users, or we can revoke the existing permissions or the permission which was already granted to any user, right? So these are basically three different statement which have been classified under this DCL statement. Okay, this is one of the example that we saw in the previous session. Grant, select, insert, update on product to user one. So we are granting select, insert, and update permission to user one on which of on what all objects are we granting. So we also need to mention the object name here. It is product table, right? So this is how we write DCL statements whenever we our requirement is to grant or deny or revoke any permission, then we use these statements. Okay, and the next one is DML statements, which is its modification, right? DML is nothing but we are trying to modify the existing data, right? We are not trying to modify existing structure, database structure or the table structure. In this case, it's a manipulation language, right? So DML is nothing but we are trying to manipulate or modify something, right? So these are the statements which comes under DML, which is select, insert, and update, and the next one is delete. So whenever you see this kind of statements, it basically what it does, it's trying to modify the existing data, right? It's not trying to modify the existing structure of the database or structure of the tables. It basically works with data. So what it does, select statement is used to read different rows from a table. Insert statement is being used to insert new row into the table. Update is to update or modify any existing row in the table, right? And delete is to delete. Either we can use delete statement to delete all the rows, or maybe if we want to filter out some rows, we can use where statement within delete itself. So we saw one of the example for the delete, right? So delete from product where id is equal to 162. So if you write just delete from product, then it means it will delete all the rows, entire rows from this product table. But if we are putting some kind of filter, in this case it's id is equal to 162, then it is going to filter out that 162 id, and then it will delete a particular or a specific id. In this case it's 162, right? So always try to use this delete statement along with some filter condition, otherwise it will delete the entire data. And then these are the objects that we are going to cover today, which is basically the view, and then store procedure and index. These are basically you need to understand and know what a view is, where do we use, what store procedure is, what is an index. So we'll learn all these three different database objects, which is basically required to uh, clear this DP 900. And these are the basic database objects that we need to understand, because these are found in different SQL formats or flavors as well, right? We also saw that different database systems will have different flavor of SQL, right? Some of the flavors are like TSQL, or whenever you work with SQL Server, Microsoft SQL Server, then you will use TSQL. And when you work with PostgreSQL, then you will have PGSQL. So different flavors of SQL are there, and for each and every different objects we need to create. But these are the base. These are the common database objects that we work with, and these are available for most of the database systems that we work with. So the first one is view, right? So what is view? View is nothing but a virtual table, right? So we saw the table, right? How do we create a table? But in this case, we are not trying to create a table. We are trying to utilize the existing table or the existing data we have in the table or different tables, right? So when do we need to use this view, or when do we actually use this view, right? So there are certain examples that I'll give you. Let's say there is a requirement for users that they want to view the data, because users are not technical in nature, right? They just want to view certain data, certain reports. They will not try to rerun or run different joins and then a combination of different syntax in SQL, right? They need a simple structure, or they just need to run the report. So in that case, if user needs this kind of report, let's say in this case user need to see order date. Along with the order, they also want certain customer details as well. So let's say there is a requirement to show you order name, order number, order date, along with name, which is first name, last name, and address of the customer. So in this case, instead of going to two tables and then creating a join condition, what user would like to, they would like to run a single query, or they want to just click a single button so that they can see the entire view, right? In this format, because user needs the data in regular or daily reconciliation. What it means is they need this data for daily reporting. So sometimes they need data for reporting purpose or analysis purpose. So instead of running this separately and joining these two tables, we can create a single view, a single object that we can use. It will basically create a virtual table, and they just need to run this query. Okay, so this is basically being used if you don't want to change the existing structure of the tables, but still you want to analyze certain rows or some kind of you want to create a format or create a different view or the virtual table, then in that case you'll use view. This is very important stored procedure. So if you are already working and any language, right? If you are aware of any language, in almost all the languages you write function, right? What's the use of creating a function? Because you want to reuse the same function in multiple places. So if the same kind of let's say set of lines needs to be added in two different programs, then you don't want to write the same set of lines in two different programs, right? You write a single function and then include that function in two different programs where it is required. So in that case, if you need to run this set of lines or set of commands, SQL commands in this case, then you don't want to run this again and again, let's say multiple commands every time you will run these multiple commands. So what we do is we create a stored procedure which is similar to function, and then we can run this function or the stored procedure any time, right? And when we run this function, we can also pass certain parameters. So in this case, let's say we want to fetch the details or let's say update a product table. That's our requirement. So we create a procedure because this is how we will update the product, right? And instead of running this query again and again, what we can do is we can create a stored procedure, and every time if we need to update the product, we can just execute this, right? Execute rename product, which is basically kind of function. What you need to update? You need to update the product ID is equal to T01. What's the new product name? It's spanner, right? How will this execute? Because we have created this stored procedure named as rename product, right? So after execute syntax of this execute command, we need to write stored procedure name and then set of parameters that we have defined. In this case, we have defined two different parameters. One is product ID. So we need to pass this product ID, and another one is new name of the product. So in this case, we are also passing this new name, right? And how we are trying to update? So this is the logic is written inside this procedure, right? So procedure is nothing but it will contain a set of functions. So let's say you have some other set of requirements. So after updating the product ID is equal to, let's say after updating this product, you need to delete certain rows, then you can add some extra statements here like delete this one or something like that, right? So you can include all those statements whatever is required. So basically you can combine set of different statements into a function which is known as stored procedure. So it is widely used in all the organizations, or whenever you work with data, or whenever you want to automate certain processes. How will you automate? You are not going to write it manually, right? You are not going to update those rows manually, or you are not going to update or run different, let's say hundreds of lines or thousands of lines each and every day, right? So you create a simple function or you create a simple stored procedure object and you schedule it. Scheduling it means whenever you work with data or database systems, right? So you can schedule a job which runs at a particular time. Another way to schedule or kick the event is based on the event. So whenever a particular event occurs, then in that case it triggers this and it will execute this stored procedure. So you don't need to know those scheduling part and all, but I'm just saying this is how we use it in real world or in different organizations, right? So if you're already working with database or database systems, then you might already be aware of what stored procedure is and how do we use it in real world. And the next one is index. So index is also very important. So index is what should we understand by index? It is something that helps us to locate the data very easily, right? So we don't need to scan the entire table. So suppose you are reading a book and you need to find certain things, right? Let's say I want to uh, look for what is the stored procedure. I am reading a database book, and then I want to directly jump into the stored procedure. What a stored procedure is, I want to read and go through that. So in order to go through it directly, I won't go each page, right? I won't just traverse each and every page. I'll just directly go to index and see where the stored procedure is. So index is nothing but you will have set of uh, different categories, or say different words written right at the end of the book. You might see different thousands of uh, uh, I mean sometimes they categorize it, and the other way to do is just mention all the words in a sorted manner, right? Let's say from alphabet A to Z. So it's basically the sorted manner. Index, I'll go to the last page, or find where the index of the book is, and then I'll directly jump into the stored procedure where the stored procedure is, and I'll find what's the page number for that stored procedure where I can refer it, right? So in this case, now I know what's the page number I need to go to directly refer what stored procedure is, if I want to know in detail. So this is something similar. Index is very much similar uh, from the book that we get, right? So it creates copy of the data, and that's in sorted manner, right? It's similar to what we discussed right now for the book part. So what's the benefit of using index? It is able to search or fetch the data quickly. And how do we create index, right? So let's say we are running a select query, or we are trying to delete or filter out certain rows based on certain columns. Then you need to create index for those columns itself, right? You don't want to create index for column which is not being used to filter the data. If I want to refer different topics, then of course I'll create index on topics itself, right? I won't create index on date part. Or let's say if I am referring in this case product name, then I won't create the index on price, right? Because it's not going to benefit me. So creating index on any column is not going to benefit you. So creating index on the column which you often use in filtering the data or data analysis and all those things, right? So you should create index on those column names only. Then only it will be beneficial and whenever you try to optimize uh, database solutioning. Now we will cover Azure database services. So what are different Azure database services? We saw there are three different uh, types of SQL that Azure provides, right? One is uh, Azure SQL database, which we will see here, Azure SQL database. Another one is Azure SQL managed instance. The third one is SQL server on Azure VM. So what's the benefit of these three, right? And what's the difference of these three? Because all these three talks about SQL server, then why do we need these three different services from Azure? So there must be certain differences in offerings, what Azure is offering to us. So if you just need to create a simple database, and if you're just starting off with Claude, you don't have any existing infrastructure in your organization, you just want to create a new database, then you should go with Azure SQL, which is basically it will create a database in Azure, and you will directly be able to use Azure SQL database with certain connection details. When you create SQL database, you will get connection details and all, and then you will be able to connect to database, and then use create a database or create tables inside it. What's the managed instance? So whenever you have an existing database or SQL server in your organization, and what your requirement is to move from on-premises infrastructure to cloud, right? In that case, you basically use SQL managed instance. When you don't want to take headache of managing infrastructure, of managing hardware, then what you will do is you will shift, or you will try to migrate your existing infrastructure or existing database to cloud, right? Because you don't want to put one or two resources managing your infrastructure or hardware, because any infrastructure, if you keep it, if you uh, use in your organizations, again, it comes at certain cost, right? There will be different teams who will take care of maintenance part. So in this case, you don't if you don't want those maintenance part to be handled by your team, you definitely want to migrate your SQL systems to cloud, then you should go with SQL managed instance. But there are certain scenarios where you would like access of operating system as well. So in SQL managed instance and SQL database, you don't get access to operating system, right? You don't get access to change certain configurations of operating system, because you are not getting that. You are just getting the platform. It's a platform as a service, right? PaaS. Again, this is also PaaS. But SQL Server on Azure VM, it provides you SQL database, SQL instance along with virtual machine. So if your requirement is to manage infrastructure or operating system part, you want to handle the configurations of your operating systems or the virtual machine, then definitely you will go with Azure VM. And what's the other scenarios where you would like to use? If your organization is already having SQL Server and you want to move to cloud along with machine, right? Along with OS that you are using. So it's basically, in your organization you will have database, and in the backend you will always have OS, right? Without that you cannot install this SQL server. So if you want to migrate the entire infrastructure along with operating system or virtual machine, it just lift and shift, right? You lift it. How do you uh, let's say you are right now working in let's say Bangalore, and you want to travel to some different parts of the country. Let's say you want to travel to Delhi, you got a new job, and then you want to migrate it there. You just book some service, right? They migrate your entire household things or a car or bike, whatever, right? They migrate it as it is, right? You don't need to take care of anything. They will just do, they will lift it and then shift the same thing and put it at the destination part. It's similar to that. It's a delivery service, right? They will deliver your SQL database and operating systems. It's called lift and shift. Even in organization it is known as lift and shift, right? Basically we are lifting our infrastructure along with database and all, and shifting to some other place. We are lifting from organization and shifting to cloud, right? That's why the name is lift and shift. So without any change, we will migrate the entire infrastructure as it is. We don't touch any configurations part here. So whatever we are getting, whatever configurations or uh, uh, the options we have on premises, the same things you will get in Azure as well. What's the architecture? Architecture also I've already included here. In this case, you get virtual machine. In this case, you have SQL managed instance. But what you need to understand in SQL as you managed instance is, we can create multiple databases, right? So each managed instance may have multiple database by default. Additionally, you can create pools, and if you want to share it with other teams, or let's say you want to create multiple databases, you can definitely create it inside instance pools, right? Those are basically known as pools. And what about Azure SQL database? In this case, the default is, whenever you create Azure SQL database, it creates a single database. Okay, it will not allow you to create multiple database. If you want to create multiple database, you will have to create elastic pool, so that you can share the resources and then across the databases or the multiple database that you want to create. What's the availability? Availability means, let's say out of 24 hours, how many hours this system will be available or will be online, it will not go down, right? So in this case 99.99% is the availability for SQL Server on Azure VM, as well as same availability is for SQL managed instance. But for Azure SQL database it gets reduced to 99.995%, right? So a bit down. So if you prefer to keep it 99.9% approx 100%, then you'll definitely go with. But also it comes at certain cost, right? If you want to uh, take care of instances or certain configuration details or configuration files along with infrastructure, let's say operating systems, you will have to manage the entire infrastructure, right? So costing will be more for Azure VMs and SQL managed instance. This will be a bit cheaper. SQL database will be a bit cheaper. If we talk about the updates or the backup or the recovery, you will get the same updates or the backups and the recovery for all these three different. But apart from that, the only thing that you need to take care of for Azure VM is all the aspects of the server, because along with database instance, you are also getting access to operating system, right? So in this case, if you are getting access to operating systems, you need to manage it, right? You need to take care of updates or patches to the operating systems. Okay, use cases we have already discussed. If there is a need to migrate your existing on-premises SQL server to cloud, and you want to take care of along with database, you want to take care of operating system virtual machine, then you definitely will go with Azure VM, SQL Server on Azure VM. But if you just want to migrate your infrastructure to the cloud and you don't want to take care of VM part, then you should go with SQL managed instance. But if you are completely uh, let's say your organization is not working on databases and you want to create a new database, then definitely you will create it directly in Azure SQL database, because you don't have existing things, right, to migrate. You can directly use this SQL database here. Okay, now we'll discuss about different open source databases. So there are different offerings from Azure end. So in the previous sessions, we covered all these three different open source database, right? So Microsoft provides services for three different open source, which is MySQL, MariaDB, and PostgreSQL. Just to revise these concepts, MySQL, right? These all are open source, and it provides services based on the community edition, right? Azure services provide this open source based on community edition. But why does Azure services provide? I mean, these are anyway open source. You can install it on your in your premises, right? So if you are already using this open source database in your organization and you don't want the headache of maintaining the existing infrastructure, maintaining operating system, maintaining hardware, right? All those things needs to be taken care when you use these softwares anywhere in your organization. Right? Some or the other needs to take care of the backend part, the maintenance part. Who will take the backup of the server? Who will take backup of this database? Right? All those things needs to be configured. So if you don't want to take care of those things, then you should migrate it to Azure. Azure services for this open source as well, which is basically a community edition, but they do provide support from their end. So in case uh, anything doesn't work in MySQL or MariaDB or PostgreSQL, they're going to support you. And apart from that, you get certain common benefit for all these Azure databases, right? What are those benefits? You have high availability, right? That's inbuilt feature. So these are the some of the features that will always be available for it will always be available for all the database systems that you use, right? So it will provide you high availability, It will provide high performance systems. It's easy to scale, right? uh, Whenever we talk about scaling, and it's cloud, right? So it's very easy to scale in the cloud. You don't need to add the servers manually. You just configure it. Okay, right now there are, uh, let's say it's a distributed system, and right now it's you are using 4 systems, or let's say 3 systems, and you want to scale it to 10 systems or 100 systems. Then you just input the number and then click. By a single click you will be able to scale to thousands of servers or thousands of databases, right? You can replicate it. So that's the benefit of using cloud. You don't start from getting the hardwares from distributors or getting the hardware from different vendors. You directly click a button and it will scale you from 0 server, or let's say 1 server, to hundreds or thousands of servers. It will certainly take some time to bring those servers up, but you don't need to work right from uh, buying hardwares. Okay, another aspect is data security, right? So whenever you work with data, security is of utmost important, and you will get the same kind of security what Microsoft, or in this case you're working with Azure, so whatever the Microsoft has, the level of security, you will get the same security level when you store your data in Azure. If you're working with AWS, you'll get the same kind of security what Amazon has. So it's you don't need to bother about the security part. So data, whether it's at rest, whether you are storing, you have just stored the data for archival purpose, or you are trying to run certain processes, that's the data in motion, right? It travels to different processes whenever you work on data, right? If you have created a pipeline, obviously you will uh, pull the data from database systems and then run some process on it or execute some code on it. And again, if you want to save it on, let's say, uh, data warehouse, or you want to save it in data lake, then obviously those data needs to be moved on from one system to another, right? So that's something, data in motion. And also whenever you work with online systems, you again retrieve data from database, right? Or you in certain scenarios you retrieve data from data warehouse if you're working on analytics part, right? So in both the cases, data is secure. You don't need to bother about security of the data. And again, this is very important from the exam perspective, because you may get some questions related to the restore days. That, I mean, let's say there may be a question like, for how many days you will be able to restore the data. So it's for the last 35 days you will be able to restore the data. Above and beyond 35 days you won't be able to restore. Let's say it's 36th or 7th date, then you won't be able to restore that. So within 35 days, if you want to restore the data, let's say today's 27th, and I want to uh, restore the data for the data which was available for me on 1st of July, then then obviously I can do that. But beyond 35 days you won't be able to do that. Okay, now we'll do one exercise. I think this was pending since last 2 sessions. We haven't done any exercises. I just want to show you guys how we can work on how we can actually work on Azure, and how it looks like. So first of all, you need to create your own account, and you need, uh, obviously you need to input certain details, credit card details. Let me share my screen and show you. Right. Just, any questions so far? Anyone? Okay. So this is whenever you when you click that link, it will take you to this Microsoft GitHub, right? It will have number of steps to follow. So this is the first part. You will let's say in this case we are trying to provision SQL database, right? So you will provision SQL database in this case. So what you will do is you need to go to Azure portal, right? So you first need to go to Azure portal. I think this is something that I need to share. Okay, I was talking about this. How do you provision SQL database on Azure, right? So these are different steps that you need to follow. The first step is you will go to the online Azure portal and then create a resource, right? You will get option to create a resource whenever you open this Azure portal, and then you will search Azure SQL. Okay. After that, you will get this screen, right? You will see these different options you have. One is SQL database, another one is SQL managed instance, and then SQL virtual machines, right? This is what we studied, right? There are three different services that you get as part of SQL server. So if you want to just create a database, you will click on it, create. If you want to create SQL database along with machines, you will have to create this one. If you want to create managed instance, then you will create this part, right? You will click here. And then you need to fill up certain form that what's the database name, whether it will be elastic pool or not, for what purpose are you using it, right? So we'll see all this. And if you want to include, this is important guys, whenever you work with this SQL database, if you want to include any existing sample or existing database just to explore it, then you should use this as well. This is very important. If you are just exploring and you don't want to create your separate database, you want to explore some existing databases, then you should definitely check this box, and then it will create the database required SQL database. And this is how it look like, right? It will show you server name, whether it is elastic pool or not. It will show you the location as well. If you are working from a US, then you will definitely want to create, it's nothing, it's uh, data center, right? If you're working from India, you can select Asia or India, whichever is more suitable, right? So it takes time. If you create even if uh, in your organization, if you have ever come across, like if you have created a virtual machine in some other region apart from your APAC, let's say you are working from India, right? So you belong to India region, or let's say APAC region, and your hardware is in or your server is in US, then it takes certain time. There is a lag. Obviously there will be a lag, even though you have uh, faster or system these days, you have high bandwidth, but still you will face you will see certain lag in that, right? So if you don't want to see those lags, then definitely you should create or these different databases or infrastructure, you need to provision it within your location, let's say Asia or uh, India, right? You won't see that much of lag because anyway you are getting the same kind of infrastructure or the services that they have. But obviously if you're working with big data systems, then obviously it needs to travel from one system to another, right? So it's kind of, it will take some time. So be mindful about the location that you are. And then once you create this database, you will get query editor, right? You will be able to run your query. So you can select different databases, get this kind of query editor. Okay, let's follow this. Let me open let me share my another screen. Okay, so once you log into your portal, do something like this screen, right? You see the services here. Okay, and if you want to create database, let's say I want to create SQL server, just search, just type in here. You won't see these different resources, right? Because you need to put it in your favorites, then only you will be able to see this in your favorite tab. But this is how it looks like. You'll see the uh, recently used different resources that you have created or that you have working with. In this case, I have multiple resource groups that I've worked on. Let's say I want to create database. I'll search SQL here. I'll just search SQL for it. And you get this different kind of services. Okay, let's say click on SQL databases, SQL servers, and then a lot of different services from Azure, right? I want to create SQL database. I'll click on it, right? You can click on create SQL database. So it's very intuitive, guys. You don't, it's not a rocket science. Okay, it's very intuitive. I want to create a database. I just search SQL databases. I want to create a new SQL database now. I'll click it here. It will show you option, different option. How do you provision it? Okay. So in this case, there are two options. If you want to create a new resource group or you want to create this database in existing resource group. What is resource group? We'll have to understand, right? It is a collection of resources that will have the same life cycle and permission and policies. So what it says is, let's say you're working on a project. Let's say I'm working on project A. I'm part of project A. So whatever the resources that we have as part of project A, it should be categorized in a single resource group, so that whatever the permission sets, whatever the life cycle that we are following for that particular group or the project, it will be applicable to all the resources inside this resource group. And hence it is very important. Let's even for the personal work, let's say you are working on SEO and you want to create multiple services. Let's say I want to create AI services or SQL service or Spark, you can create it. But if you create multiple resource in different resource groups, then you will have to go to each resource group, and then if you want to stop or delete or manage it, then it's some kind of complex to manage all those different resource groups. Right, you will have to go to different resource groups, and then if you want to delete it or stop the services, you will have to do that from different resource group. But in this case, if you put it inside a single resource group for your project, let's say project A, and if you want to delete all the resources after your work is over, you can directly delete this resource group itself. You don't need to delete resources individually, right? You just delete the group, it will remove all the resources inside it. So let's say I want to use the existing okay, let's create a new one. So let's say resource group. So something, this is the naming convention that you can follow. Okay, RG or maybe SQL underscore RG, something to indicate that this is the resource group for what purpose you are creating it, right? Let's say RG underscore sample SQL. Okay, we are creating a new one. It has a new resource group. So whatever the resources, in this case it's SQL database. SQL database is the resource that we are trying to create, and the resource group name is RG underscore sample SQL. So it will be visible under RG underscore sample SQL. What's the database name? Let's say I put DB01. Okay, that's, let's say, the database name. Server, there are no existing servers, so you'll have to create a new server. If you already have an existing server or database server, then you might want to use existing database server, right? And also it depends on your subscription, right? In certain cases or scenarios, you won't have access to use other locations. Let's see if I have access to Asia Pacific. I believe I should have Central India. Obviously it allowed me to. select this location, right? So this is very important. Again, I'm just repeating this part. This is very important. Location is very important. Let's say server name, say server 01. Okay, specify server name is already used. You'll have to create a unique one. Let's I'll put str. Okay, so this is intra id, okay, that you want to create, which is basically being used whenever you work with Microsoft services or Azure services. There is something which is intra authentication, which is automatically it gets authenticated based on your account details, existing account details. Okay, let's set it as admin. Let's show fill up certain part. Okay, let's click on OK. Okay, the value must not be empty. Let's select this one. Click on OK. Now you need to select. So whatever we have selected is it's trying to create for it's trying to create database. So now whether we want to create an elastic pool, which is the pool which will share the resources, the database servers or the systems, the backend systems, right? In this case, you can configure what kind of machine you need, right? So you can click on this configure database. It will show you different options, whether you need high performance or budget server. So you get all those different options. Let's say general purpose, which is budget friendly. If you need highly scalable compute, then you can create this. So based on the requirement, you can create different configurations. What's the core? Let's say it's available from one core, right? Let's see the maximum what we can create. 80 core, right? 30 GB minimum memory, right? What's the minimum V core? 10 cores, right? So all the options you have. Let's say I just want to create a simple one. Don't want to change anything. Okay. What's the workload? I'm creating it for development purpose. I'll click on development. If you are creating it for production purpose, you click on production. So compute and storage, it's the normal one. Geo redundant, locally redundant, and zone redundant. It's something which is whether you want to create a backup of your database. How do you want to create backup? Whether it will be located in the same data centers, whether it will be located in different database data centers. So all those things we have different options. Let's say in this case, I just want to create redundant. Okay, I don't want to create geo. We don't to know this in details. It's you understand there is some local data centers and you want to create this backup within the same data center. It's something called zone wherein multiple data centers will have. And if you want to create in different geographical locations, different data centers, then obviously you'll choose geo. Okay, so it's all about data redundancy if you want to create a replica of your databases. So this is something related to that. Let's say review and create, or let's say go to networking part. Let's see additional things, right? This is minimum TLS version. This is the default. You select everything as default. And we see if we want to create a sample database as well, right? If you want to work with sample database, you can directly go to additional settings. Use existing data, right? In this case, the default is none, but I want to use sample database, right? Let's click on sample. Okay. Do you want to create? Okay, it will create adventure works. Yes, LT. So it will create a sample database for you. If you don't select it, it will not create it. So you will not be able to play with this database, new database. So if you are creating an empty data server, database server, you will have to explicitly create database. Obviously, I mean, in your organization, you don't create the sample database, but if you want to play with data for your personal project, you will have to select this sample, okay, and then review and create it. Okay, let's click on create. And in most of the cases, it's not automatic. I mean, it's not automated way, right? We are manually following each and every step and then we are creating it. But let's say you want to automate this process, then you have certain template, right? You will download a template. You can click on download, it will download all the configurations that we have created right now. Download it, and in the next time, you can just import it and then deploy, or if you want to create it for production, you will use this template for that purpose. Okay, for now, I'll just click on create. It will take some time. See the resources here. What's the type of resource? It's SQL Server. It will show you the it will show you the progress of database creation or the database server creation. So it says deployment is in progress. Okay, let's come back to this after a few minutes, because it's going to take 2 or 3 minutes, I believe. So till now, till that point, let's go with the other slides we have. Okay, so this is the exercise that we are following. We are creating the database services. Let me. Okay, in the meantime, we'll cover the other topics. Okay, so the next topic is Microsoft Azure Data Fundamentals. In this case, we are exploring non-relational data, right? So right now we have explored data formats, relational data in Azure, and now we are going to explore non-relational data in Azure. What are the different Azure storage for non-relational data? We have option for creating blob storage. We have option to create data lake storage gen 2, which is basically a kind of blob. We have option to create Azure files, then Azure tables, right? This Azure table, I repeated, this Azure table is different from database tables. Okay, so whenever we find this Azure table, that means we are talking in terms of storage, right? It's kind of a wherein it's kind of a file system wherein we just store the data in key and value pair. This is that you this is what you need to understand with this Azure table. So don't get confused. This is different from database tables. Okay, it doesn't adhere to relational database systems. So it's completely it just key and value that gets stored at some particular storage point or the storage location, which we call it as tables. And then we'll see certain exercises on Azure storage, and then we'll cover the Azure Cosmos DB. So Azure Cosmos DB is basically non-relational database, and then we have different kinds of APIs for this Azure Cosmos. So Azure Cosmos DB will include all four different kinds of database or non-relational database like key value pair, graph DB or document DB and all those things, right? So everything will be covered in Azure Cosmos DB. Okay. So what's the need of Azure storage for non-relational data? Right? Why are we creating this storage for non-relational, right? So there is something that relational database systems, for relational database systems, you need to adhere to certain schema, right? It's very rigid. You will have to store data in rows and columns, right? And hence the name, right? SQL database or relational database. But if you don't need that rigid structure, and if you are working with let's say unstructured data, right, which doesn't get to any structure. It doesn't have any schema. It doesn't have any rows. It doesn't have any columns. It doesn't have any definite properties, right? In that case, you need different structure to store or save that kind of data. So where do you store it? You store it in non-SQL server, which is non-relational data, right? It's non-relational data. We can call it non-relational database or NoSQL database. Both are same. Okay. So for non-relational data also, we get two different things. One is storage part and another one is database part, right? So storage is, let's say, similar to file storage or network storage, right? What we saw in uh, relational data, related to relational data, right? So similarly, we have something different services for non-relational data. Okay, so first we'll talk about Azure Blob Storage. So as the name itself indicates, it's basically for the blob, which is binary large object, right? So whenever we work with audio video files, these are all very large files, right? And if you want to store it somewhere, then you will, in this case, you are creating a blob storage and you want to store it here, right? So if you're storing large files, then obviously it needs to be optimized for storage as well, right? Uh, Otherwise, if you store multiple large files, it will fill up your space, and then you will have to put or add some additional space or the storage, right? So in this case, it's optimized storage. So whenever you work with large objects, you definitely want to create work with blob storage if you're working with Azure, which is basically optimized for cloud storage. And then it provides different API if you want to access the existing data, or if you want to access any of the blocks that you have stored, then you will have to use API, and with that, using that API, you will be able to access the file, the blocks that you have stored in this blob storage. And one thing to note down is you store these different blobs inside a blob container, right? So there are these terminologies you need to remember. Each storage account, if you're working with blob storage, you will get blob container. Inside blob container, you will be able to import different blobs that you're working with, and you can also create folder, right? But it's not the actual folder that you see in your local system. It's similar to that, but it is virtual in nature. Okay, it's not real folder that if you want to fetch all the files inside that folder, then no, you won't be able to fetch files inside that folder, because it's just a virtual name. It's just that you are prepending this blob 2 with this folder 1 name. Okay, it doesn't uh, it's not a real folder. You won't be able to run or run any query related to that folder that I want to list out all the documents or the blobs inside that folder 1. Then you won't be able to run it. Okay, you won't be able to perform any folder operations, any folder level operations on that. Okay, and there are different kinds of blobs. There are three different kinds of blob. One is block blobs, another one is page blobs, and the third one is append blobs. Okay, so what is block blobs? As the name itself indicates, it has set of blocks, right? Block is nothing but the smallest amount of data, right, that you can read or write in the storage part. What's the maximum block size? So the maximum block size is 4000 MIB. Okay, and whenever you see this MIB, you don't mistake it with MB. Okay, this MIB is different from MB, megabyte, right? So MB, if you are working with big data systems, MB usually in multiples of thousand, and whenever you see this MIB, that means you're talking about multiples of 1024. Okay, so it's different from MB. It's not a mistake, it's different from MB. Okay, so whenever you talk about thousand multiples of 1024, you can use this MIB in systems. Or if you want to write in multiples of thousand, then obviously you will just write MB or TB. Okay, what's the maximum blob size?
197 TIB. Okay, that's the block size. So you might need to remember it, but I haven't seen these things coming up in if you uh, say in exam perspective. I We won't necessarily get this kind of questions, but you just need to remember that block is the smallest amount of data, right? That can be written on blocks. And then we'll discuss about page blobs. What is page blobs? As the name itself indicates, it contains pages, right? So it will have collection of pages. Okay, and it is optimized for read and write operations, right? So whenever you work with transactional systems, that needs to be optimized for read and write. So in that case, it's mostly suitable. And even most or all the operating systems or the virtual machine disk are even backed up by page blocks. So whenever you work with virtual machines, that means the storage for those virtual machines are inside this. They are using page blocks. Okay, what's the maximum size? So maximum block size is 8 TB, right? In this case, it's not TIB, it's multiple of 1000, right? It's TB, 8 TB. And then the next and the final one is append blob, which is basically the name itself indicate we are trying to append something to the blob, right? So in this case, if we are trying to append some blobs to the existing one, we will be appending to blobs. Okay, what it is optimized for? It is optimized for append operations only. Okay, and how do we add it? It can be only added at the end. We cannot add any blobs in the middle of blobs, right? Which is collection of a set of blocks. Okay, and once you create it, you won't be able to delete or update the blobs. Okay, that's not supported. What's the maximum size for the blob? It's 195 GB. Okay, you need to remember these things like what it is optimized for. It is optimized for appending. What it is page blobs optimized for. It is optimized for read and write. What is block? It's the smallest amount of data that we can read or access or write. Okay, so today we'll wrap up till this part, and then tomorrow we'll cover the remaining part, which is basically we'll discuss all kind of non-relational DB and services for the non-relational part, and also we'll discuss about the different visualizations or the services or Microsoft BI, which is basically used for visualization purpose. And what is remaining today is we created database in Azure, right? We created SQL database. So now it has been, it might have already been created. Let's go back to Azure portal and see the progress, or let's say track the progress of that. Okay, so now it says your deployment is complete, right? It means it is created successfully. Let's go to, let's go to resources. Now we see this, right? This is how it will look like. It will show you the location where it will be created, whether it is online or offline. It's live. Location is Central India. It's online. It is available at your service. You will be able to create different databases. You will be able to create different database tables. Okay, how can you access it? You can access it directly using its server name. Let's click on this. You'll see different properties. You will see activity log. If you want to see the logs related to this database server, then you click on this activity log. Okay, you will see those different logs related to this one. It's updating, right? You can check different logs. If you need to check the logs, let's say in real scenarios, in most of the cases you want to check the log. So what's the issue with the existing services? So you can see, check that in activity logs. Okay, let's go back to the server. Okay, so we have already created, we already have we had included sample database, right, while creating the systems. Let's go to that. This is query editor, right? Okay, it's saying it's a deny service. Let's check this. So you might see these different kinds of things, right? You'll have to diagnose this, and then you will have to provide exact. Okay. So we are getting this error, right? An instance a specific error occurred while establishing a connection to SQL server. So you won't have public connections, right? Network is disabled. So what we need to do is we need to put it to no, right? Here it is, we are denying the public's network services. So we need to set it to no. Okay, how do we set it? You can get everything here. Okay, yes. You follow this and you will be able to do that. So let's go to this. Yeah. So this is the server name. If you want to connect it through external systems, so you will need database server name and also the connection string, right? So you can copy it directly from here. These are all properties, you can see it here. Okay, so let's check this now. Let's go to home, resource group. We have created this server. Let's create 1 DB. Locally redundant. Looks like there is some issue with my account. Okay, let's try it. Okay. So in case you see any issue with the server, let's say access part, then you'll have always to go to the networking, right? And then you need to allow. So this is kind of a security that Microsoft or the Azure, right, or any cloud services offers. So you will have to explicitly add or allow your IP to access that server, right? In this case, let's say I want to allow my IP address to access this different database servers. So I'll have to allow this, right? I will have to allow this or add a new rule so that I can access those different services that we have created on Azure, right? Because it's all being accessed by network or internet, right? So you need certain security so that not everyone is able to access your database systems or machines that you have provisioned in the cloud, right? So it's kind of security. So I've already provisioned this. Let's see if we are able to access it now. Okay.
go to the resources. This is the server. Okay, so this is the database that we created. Let's go to query editor again. Now we don't see that error, right? Earlier we were seeing the error, like it was not allowing us to access this database. So now that we have added our IP address and also allowed the system to connect to this using intra authentication, we'll be able to continue using our own ID. Okay, so I'll click on let's continue with the existing ID. Okay, here it is. So now we'll be able to see all the tables and views or the stored procedures, right? So what we discussed, different database objects, right? So you all see these three different database objects: tables, views, stored procedures. What are different tables we have? These are the different tables, right? So we had included sample tables, and hence that's the reason you are able to see these different sample tables, right? Sales, LD. Let's see details for address. If you click on this three dot, it will allow you to generate queries for your purpose, right? Let's say in this case I want to select rows, top 1,000 rows. You just click on it, it will automatically create rows for you. It will automatically create that query for you, right? This is how you can access. Suppose it here. Right? So it is allowing you to see different rows that you have stored in the database. So this will show you the result, and then you can see messages, how many rows were affected. Let's say it only has 450 to show, right? Even if you selected this 1,000, it doesn't have those many rows in that particular tables, right? So it's only 450 rows that it's showing. If you want to run some other things, let's say I just want to select two columns, address, and then let's directly type in address ID and then city. So these are different address ID and city. This is how you can run. Okay. So this is how you provision a database in Azure. It's similar to how do we do it on premises for different database systems, but it's something that you access via internet, right? Don't uh, uh, you don't create, since you're not creating it inside your premises. You can access it from anywhere, right? You can access it from anywhere, wherever you are. So that's all for today. We have covered one of the practical aspects of it as well. So this is how you'll create. I think in uh, certification, they won't ask any question related to the practical part of it, but obviously you need to understand if you want to work with Azure, or if you want to understand it in detail, then you will have to know these concepts as well. How do you create, or otherwise you will just keep visualizing, right? How do we create database systems, or how do we work with databases? So this is how you will create a database, and this is how you are going to query it if you are working with Azure, right? So that's all for today. We'll cover the next remaining topics tomorrow. Tomorrow we are going to complete the entire uh, topics for all the topics required for DP 900. So thank you all. Any questions before we wrap it up? Okay, see you guys tomorrow. Let's continue with the remaining topics tomorrow, and tomorrow we are going to complete all the required topics for DP 900. Thank you. Good night.